This is Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS, HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Montgomery Mosaic features topics of interest to Montgomery County residents, businesses, and visitors. Here now is your host, Deborah Milo.
Well, good morning, Montgomery County, and welcome to the June edition of Montgomery Mosaic. I'm your host, Deborah Milo. I hope you're having a great day so far. You know, as you know, we use the platform of Montgomery Mosaic to provide our listening audience with important and relevant information. We work very hard to ensure we feature guests that not only inform but inspire us as well. Well, I think my guest today is someone who has spent her life inspiring and advocating for the rights of the most vulnerable within our society. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Delegate Janelle Wilkins. Janelle has been a member of the House of Delegates for District 20, Silver Spring, and Tacoma Park since January 25th in 2017. And speaking of being an inspiration, listeners, Delegate Wilkins is just the third African-American woman to represent Montgomery County. Delegate Wilkins, welcome to Montgomery Mosaic. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning, Montgomery County.
And County friends, she has a beautiful smile, I have to tell you that. Before we get started, I'm sure our listening audience, as well as myself, would be interested to know what really inspired you to carve out a career in public service?
That's such a good question. Public service has just the opportunity to really transform lives, and making an impact has always been something that I've been passionate about. I was actually born in Kingston, Jamaica.
Nice.
And yes, that's a place where people don't have a whole lot of opportunity.
That's right.
To succeed and thrive. And so coming to the United States and having so many more opportunities at a very young age, I was just always interested in policy change and helping to make a difference so that everyone is able to succeed.
That's amazing. Now, how long? You've been here how long?
I moved to the United States when I was 5 years old.
Oh, you were just
I've
a
been
little
here.
thing.
Yes.
Well, it's really wonderful to see you here and just to know what you are standing for and advocating for. And with that, I want to begin our conversation today talking about affordable housing in the 2018 session. Obviously, I'm tongue-tied today, listeners. You know, as you know, District 20 has some of the most expensive housing markets here in the region. Many of our residents, they just simply can't afford the burden of high housing costs. And I know that this has an exceptionally negative impact to the quality of their lives. I want you to talk a little bit about the work that's been done in the 2018 session to increase affordable housing options for potential homeowners and renters and seniors alike.
Sure, absolutely. And I also want to share with the listening audience that our legislative session every year is only 90 days. Wow. So the legislature only meets from January to April during that 90-day period to address legislation. And this year, we debated over 3,000 bills. We had a record, yes, we had a record number of bills this year. And so as you can imagine, those 90 days, we were just working to make sure that every bill got a hearing, sort of its day in court, and debating legislation. So we were able to pass a number of them. So on the topic of affordable housing, absolutely. In Montgomery County, as you mentioned, it is just an expensive housing market. And there's so much more that we have to do to ensure that we have affordable options for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we talk about affordable housing, we really have to ask ourselves, affordable for who?
Good. Oh, yes.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, when we think about seniors on fixed income, when we think about people who are in poverty, when we think about moderate income people, when we think about young people and just the diversity of our region, immigrant families, there are sort of different housing needs and different price points for different communities. And so we have to make sure that when we say affordable housing, that we have price points and affordability for our various communities.
And see, that's so critical because I'm a resident for Lex C about almost 12 years now. And the part of the country that I come from and the part of the world that my family comes from, you know, it's really interesting to see the difference. You know, it's imbalanced, you know, because where I come from, you know, a 3-bedroom home, 2 bathrooms, you know, typical, what we say a typical house, it's only going to cost you about $100,000. Whereas here it's completely different. So you can imagine the sticker shock that people have when they come here, especially immigrants. Wouldn't you agree?
I absolutely agree. So there's much more to be done. And I think at the state level, one of the things that we really have to look at that I've been working with the county on is that because our region, just by the numbers, appears to have so much wealth here in Montgomery County, right? There's so many pockets of poverty and there's so much lack of affordability. But when we compare it to the entire state, oftentimes we don't get our fair share when it comes to the affordable housing money.
This is true.
Exactly. So one of the things that I'm absolutely working on is making sure that we're able to reconfigure that formula for the state so that our region is able to get its fair share when it comes to affordable housing.
I understand you sponsored the legislation to raise the state minimum wage, since we're talking about affordable housing, because in order to buy a home or to be a homeowner, you need money. And so I know that you were working on the state minimum wage, and you helped champion the passage of earned sick leave. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of those two pieces of legislation?
Absolutely. Economic security of residents is just so critical in our region, in our area. I mean, when I think about economic security, I think about housing, like we just talked about. I think about transportation, I think about health care, child care, access to jobs. And what this minimum wage legislation would do, it's been sponsored for several years now, is it would raise the minimum wage to $15 by the year 2023. And so that would be statewide. Montgomery County right now, we're ahead of the game in terms of raising the minimum wage, which I think Montgomery County is at $11.50 now.
I think so, yes.
And the state is at $10.10. So Montgomery County is definitely ahead in that. We want to make sure that we bring the entire state to $15. That would make a huge impact.
That impact would be so significant, and the lives of people, literally the lives of people, the quality would change. You'd see such a difference in how people feel about their work too, would you think?
Absolutely. I think that being fairly compensated when you get your paycheck, just being able to actually pay your bills and being able to live and thrive, just makes a huge difference in terms of our workforce.
Now, I want you to think back, Delegate Wilkins. Can you remember your first job that you had?
I do, actually. I worked in the home department at JCPenney, which was really funny because it was like towels, and I was probably like 16 or 17, and just home products were not a thing
not then, no.
that I was an expert on at all.
Well, you know what? I'm not surprised at all. Hello again, listeners. You've tuned into Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL with your host, Deborah Milo. And my guest today is Delegate Janelle Wilkins. And Delegate Wilkins holds the House seat for Maryland's District 20, which is, of course, Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. And we're having a very informative discussion about some of the 2018 legislation that will impact District 20's most pressing issues. We were talking previously about economic security and the push for the minimum wage to be increased. And, with that, all of these topics seem to join, they confluence at some point, especially this one about educational equity. It's so critical within our society, but we know, that's not the reality for everyone. Talk about how the playing field is being leveled to ensure all students have access to a good education, and also the need for legislation to focus on early childhood education, which I am a huge component of.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that we're talking about this, because educational equity and closing our achievement gap in our state absolutely has to be a top priority. It's something that the legislature is addressing. The biggest thing right now that's happening in education that's so important to know about is what's called the Kirwan Commission. And it is a commission in our state that has been meeting for almost 2 years now, that's looking at our education formula and looking at how we add more money and make sure that resources are equitable all across the state. So again, that's the Kirwan Commission. I definitely encourage everyone to follow along with it. And not only is it looking at money in our education formula in terms of how we allocate our resources in our state, but also policy changes with how we make sure that we're supporting teachers, class size, making sure that students who are English learners or students who are low income also have the support that they need. And so we're really looking at several policy changes and also financial changes in our state to really address a resource issue.
And Delegate Wilkins, as you know, all of the topics that we have been talking about do confluence. They come together to create opportunities, especially when it comes to educational equity. Expand a little bit more about a focus on early childhood education, because I don't think that that's always viewed as being the most important, because in my mind, when you give a child a good start, you're giving them a good future.
Sure, absolutely. A strong early start has been shown to actually make a major impact in a student's life and their ability to achieve. And so a goal for the state, and something that I've been working to champion, is making sure that every student is able to access that strong early start. And so universal pre-K over the next few years is something that we're working to roll out. And one of the things that we did in the 2018 session is to put additional resources into pre-K, into that early childhood education, so that more students are able to benefit from our early childhood education programs.
Now, I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to this kind of stuff, especially now since my children are so much older. But what is universal PK?
Great question. So what that means is every student having access, for example, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, to early schooling, early education. So when we talk about universal, right now, a good amount of low-income students are able to afford it. Some students who have parents with means are able to afford it. But there's certainly a major gap there in terms of making sure that every single student has that access to an early start. So for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, so that's something that's really critical in our state in terms of evening the playing field so that all students have that opportunity.
And see, that's something that, I'm sure you can't either stress enough. It's important to make sure that your children are able to receive that education starting very young. Would you say 3 or 4 years old for preschool?
Yes, absolutely. We're starting with 4-year-olds, but I absolutely would like to see us make sure that we include 3-year-olds as well. We want to start as early as possible.
Because I'll tell you something, and more, and I hear my own grandchildren, the children learn, and they're sponges at such a young age. I don't remember being that way, but, at such a young age, children are being, bombarded by so much media, even so. When you see a 3-year-old child that knows how to work your cell phone or your iPhone.
Exactly.
Oh, then you kind of ask the question, okay, so this technology is what they're learning. What else are they going to be able to learn at that age? Hello again, listeners. You've tuned into Montgomery Mosaic on Talk Radio 1450 WOL with your host, Deborah Milo, and my guest today is Delegate Janelle Wilkins. Janelle holds the House for seat Maryland's District 20, which is Silver Spring and Tacoma Park, as you know, and this is a very informative discussion about what's going on in the legislation that's been passed through 2018. And we're going to talk next about school safety. And Delegate Wilkins, I wanted to talk about educational equity, because, of course, when it's coupled, I should say school safety is coupled with educational equity, at least in my mind. How was school safety addressed during the 2018 session?
That's a really great question, because actually during the legislative session, there were 2 major situations that happened in the nation and actually in Maryland.
True.
We had the Florida shooting that occurred. We also had a shooting in St. Mary's County, Maryland.
That's right.
And so those definitely created challenges in terms of figuring out what can we do in our state. I was getting so many messages from students who were standing up, walking out, and saying that we want to feel safe in our schools. So we did take action this legislative session. We passed the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, which was a really comprehensive, probably one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation in the nation around making sure that our students are safe. So it includes things like training for teachers and students to make sure that everyone is able to work to prevent these situations from happening, identifying students who may pose a threat, and also being able to respond and knowing what to do if a situation does occur.
Delegate Wilkins, I want to continue to talk about the school safety issue, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. So, audience, listeners, don't go away. We're going to come right back with Delegate Janelle Wilkins. Stay right there. County friends. Welcome back to Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL. I'm Deborah Milo, your host, here talking with Delegate Janelle Wilkins, representing Maryland's 20th District. We're having a very informative discussion about some of the legislation which was passed during the 2018 session. And before we went to break, I wanted to kind of circle back to talk about school safety. And Delegate Wilkins, you were talking about Maryland Safe to Learn.
Yes, we passed the Maryland Safe to Learn Act. It's a very comprehensive piece of legislation around school safety. In addition to what I mentioned around training for teachers and students and administration, is that we also looked at school resource officers.
Oh, smart. Okay,
Yes, absolutely. They're a big part of school safety. And we want to ensure that law enforcement officers who are working in the schools, because being on the street as a law enforcement officer and being in a school, of course, two different things.
Completely different.
Right, completely different tactics that need to be employed. We made sure that we standardized the high-level training so that every single school resource officer is receiving training that includes de-escalation, implicit bias, and really ensuring that we keep our kids safe in the schools.
Do you have any idea as to whether or not that has been as successful as you hope it will be? Is it showing, are the numbers showing that it's successful so far?
Well, since we haven't fully implemented it yet, it's hard to say.
Okay.
But I think probably this time next year or so, we'll be able to have some numbers and some more information. And I think it's always good to be able to take stock in where we are and then go back and readjust as needed.
I can't tell you how glad I am to hear that the resource officers will receive training, because, you know, we folks who are outside of the school, the school system, we don't realize just how important those resource officers really are, because of the ability to be able to de-escalate a situation, you know, and you're dealing with children. You know, so therefore, you have to have some kind of idea that these are still children, and so it's all about protecting them, wouldn't you say?
Exactly, absolutely. School resource officers, certainly we have to make sure that their roles are clear. We want to make sure there aren't any adverse incidences that occur, and I think that an important piece of that is ensuring that training happens, because what we have now is some are trained, some are not trained.
Oh, yes.
Right. For the training that they have, is it something that we would universally consider, you know, a high-level training that includes the de-escalation that you just mentioned? So one of the things that I really think is important in this legislation that we passed is ensuring that high-level standardized training for those school resource officers.
I appreciate you saying high level, because we have to really understand that there has to be not just a standard, but there's got to be a high standard. That bar has to be set high.
Absolutely.
You're dealing with lives every day, lives of innocent children every day.
Absolutely.
You have to know how to engage with them.
Yes.
I want to shift a little bit, Delegate Wilkins, and talk about environmental justice. You know, there's so much talk about the environment, and we hear differing opinions about things like fracking, clean water, renewable energy, and the need for more clean energy jobs. I have to tell you, in my day, I don't think there was such a phrase as clean energy jobs, but it's so important to be able to understand that now. Can you share how the new legislation will encourage these positive outcomes for our environment?
Absolutely. In the 2018 session, there were a number of bills introduced around the climate and the environment, especially what's happening now at the federal level, where we're seeing so many rollbacks when it comes to environmental protections. We really need to take action in our state so that we can be accountable in terms of moving forward with some important environmental initiatives. So one of the things that we saw and that we passed is making sure that the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a group of states that have committed to reducing our greenhouse gases, reducing those the pollution that we emit. We passed legislation to actually join the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is really important for our state, holding ourselves accountable to our own greenhouse gases and pollution.
Okay, I want to make sure our listeners understand this. So the U.S. Climate Alliance is something that we've joined with other states, you said?
Exactly. So it's almost like a pact. Right. You could think about it as a pact with other states in terms of committing to reducing greenhouse gases that negatively impact the environment.
So what about the issue with the clean water? Do you think that that's going to be high on the list for that, as well as the, fracking and the renewable energy?
Absolutely. We have to look at every single angle when it comes to our environment, our water, our air. And when it comes to clean water, one of the issues that have come up is around the ban on fracking, which impacts our water. Fracking, it basically is drilling into and using chemicals and liquids to drill into the earth to get to some hard to reach rock. And studies have shown and information has told us that in other places that use fracking, it really impacts the water. It can taint the water and taint the air. And so the ban on that was very important for clean water in our state. I've also been an advocate against additional pipelines in our state. There's a fracked pipeline that is scheduled to bury under the Potomac River. And yes, and so that is something of concern, because even a small leak could seep into our water and, could be poisonous and harmful for us. So that is something that we're actively working on. Right now, there was the opportunity for our state administration, our governor, to be able to stop it, and that did not happen. So we're exploring all options possible to make sure that we're able to stop that pipeline and make sure that we don't put our water in danger.
So I don't think that a lot of people, including myself, really understand how that works until you've just explained it, because you don't think about it from that perspective. Many times we only see it from the external perspective, and we're only able to process that part of it. But I appreciate how you've explained how the fracking would cause dangerous water levels, is what, poisonous water.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
That's something. I'm not a biologist. I don't have a degree in biology, but it certainly is something that we would really need to think about. These issues are very, very critical.
Most definitely.
Talk a little bit more about the need for the clean energy jobs. I don't think everyone understands that. I think I do, but I'd like for you to kind of clarify that.
That's a great question. I think one of the emerging markets and emerging industries is going to be in the area of clean jobs. When we talk about the environment, there's a lot of potential to create an industry in terms of a workforce around making sure that, for example, the move to solar. Who's going to build those solar panels and install them?
Yes.
Right? When we greatly expand how much we're using in our state, that's a job industry.
It is a job industry.
Exactly. When we think about the fact that our state is actually moving forward with expanding our wind energy off of the Ocean City area, we have a wind farm that's being developed.
Right.
How about the turbines that are used? Our state could be a leader in being manufacturers around those turbines, and really being able to be in a position where we're developing all of this infrastructure around clean energy and able to ship it out to other states, and that we could be producers. So there's certainly a lot of job opportunity and job potential when we talk about the environment. It's important for us to support that, make sure that we are training a diverse workforce to be ready to take that on. And I think clean energy jobs is a really, really important market that we have to make sure that we support.
I couldn't agree with you more. I know you have a passion about immigrant rights, so we're going to shift a little bit. It's something you've advocated for quite a while. Talk about the Maryland Trust Act, because as many may not understand how it works, I know I don't.
That is a great question, especially now when we are just seeing people in our community that are being detained and deported, and it's something that we want to prevent. We want to be a welcoming, inclusive community here in Maryland and in Montgomery County. And what the Trust Act legislation does is it prevents law enforcement from coordinating with ICE when it comes to flagging people and detaining them. So, for example, let's say it could be a minor traffic stop,
right?
And someone ends up somehow being taken into the police station, fingerprinted. They pop up, and ICE says, I don't see them in the system. We're concerned that they might be undocumented. Hold them. And so that's an important decision there for our local police and our tax dollars to help to detain someone and potentially deport someone where maybe it just started off as a minor traffic violation. A family could be broken up. And so the Trust Act actually prevents local law enforcement coordination with ICE so that we can make sure that our families are able to stay together and that we build trust in law enforcement as well.
Build trust in law enforcement. That is so very important. And on the heels of that, I know we've switched around a little bit, but on the heels of that, I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about justice reform.
Sure, absolutely. We have been doing a number of things at the state level when it comes to both gun safety, but also criminal justice reform. I want to talk quickly because we did so much great work on gun safety in particular.
Yes.
I want to mention that one of the things we did this year was a ban on bump stocks.
Yes.
Which is sort of where people rig their guns to be assault rifles.
Right.
And that was what the Las Vegas shooter used. And so we're able to ban that. We also created a process to ensure that domestic abusers, that their guns are taken away. That was something that's been in the making for a number of years now. I was really proud that we got that bill passed.
Okay.
And then we also have a new law where a judge can actually temporarily remove a gun from someone who is posing a threat to themselves or others. That will be really critical legislation.
Well, you has some amazing things with the legislation, and I thank you for coming to talk about everything with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Unfortunately, listeners, that's all we have time for today, and I'd like to once again thank Delegate Janelle Wilkins as well as yourselves for tuning in and spending your time. Now, don't forget to tune in again next month for another Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Till next time, be informed, be inspired, and most of all, be kind to one another.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOL and 95.9 FM.
You've been listening to Montgomery Mosaic, featuring topics of interest to Montgomery County residents, businesses, and visitors. For more information or a copy of the show, email publicinformation@montgomerymd.gov or call 240-777-6507. Be sure to tune in at this time on the second Wednesday every month for Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS, HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com.